Dear moderator, panelists, and participants, my name is Asha Al-Blushi, and I welcome you all to this special gathering on behalf of Dr. Muhammad Al-Ali, the CEO of Trends Research and Advisory. Tonight, we have gathered to address a critical issue, the future of resources and sustainability. It covers a wide range of areas, including something as important as globalization and its impact on food security. We will try to look at the urban environment and the impact of its transformation on the current economic issue during this session. There is also the highly critical subject of sustainable water management and its implication on water security. We highlight the challenges and opportunities of holistic, sustainable water management of a more expanded scope of water security. We are also highlighting the impact of climate change on the quality and quantity of water resources. At Trends Research and Advisory, we have always highlighted the significance of technology and innovation. Tonight, we will try to look at these subjects in the context of water and food security. This segment will highlight the role of technological advancement in achieving global food and water security, while also focusing on the opportunities and challenges ahead. We are also looking at the best practices tonight, where we will discuss the effort made in planning and finding solutions, achieve and sustain food and water security during COVID-19 crisis. I once again welcome you all and thank all the panelists for taking their valuable time to share their expertise on the subject. We look forward to their presentation. And on that note, I hand over the floor to the moderator of the evening, Rose Armour. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Aisha. First, I would like to thank Trends for organizing the event, and second, I would like to welcome the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. I am honored to have the opportunity to moderate this esteemed panelists in what promises to be an engaging and informative discussion. In the UAE, as in the world over, COVID-19 pandemic has brought to light the importance of sustainability in our current resource usage, from extraction to access to equity to supply chain. This is an area that is of the utmost importance today for our future. Each of our panelists will speak for 15 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So with no further ado, let's introduce our first panelist. I'd like to introduce and invite Bonmi Al-Jolore, who is the lead advisor for Pharos Advisors and a senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development, West Africa. He is a strategic foresight and international development expert with over 12 years of experience across Africa, Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, and the South Pacific Islands, mainly in foresight advisory and in international agricultural development and program management roles. During those times, he worked with or consulted for organizations such as UNFAO, the Technical Center for Rural Collaboration or Rural Cooperation, International Center for Tropical Agriculture, UNDP, and the Bond UK and OECD. Bonmi will be talking today on globalization and the impact of food security. So Bonmi, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Rose, and nice to be here and to be talking to the audience and to be joining this particular symposium. Good evening or good day to you, wherever you may be, everyone. I'm going to jump right into it because of my time. So, as Rose has kindly introduced, I'll be talking on globalization and the implications for food security and food systems at the global level. So quickly, What is we all know what globalization means in simple terms, which is the increasing interconnectedness of our production, distribution, and exchange systems across the world. Its main impact on food system and food security has significantly until now been in influencing what we eat, what is produced, how it is produced, and how accessible and affordable it is to individuals and different people across the globe. So currently, some of the big impacts of what we say the existing trends and impact of globalization on food systems include some of the impact I've highlighted here, which is that one, food is abundant but not evenly distributed or accessed by individuals across the globe. One other impact is also the increasing homogeneity in production in terms of we now have like 12 crops dominate much of what we eat across the globe. Another impact is we have an increasing tech-driven production and distribution system. And then there's higher demand and increasing contribution of the agri-food system to climate change and all that. So I'm just going to run quickly, especially quickly on some of these current trends. And the first one is what I said, that food is abundant, but not for everyone. As I was saying, many of the major cereals, especially the grains that we eat, have witnessed has more than doubled in production output compared to what we had 40 or 50 years ago. So at the global level, we are increasing the amount of food we're producing, but then it is not evenly distributed or evenly accessible by everyone across the globe. And besides that, you then have the double issue of, on the one hand, starvation or undernutrition, and on the other hand, we have overnutrition or obesity. Usually, one is usually in the developing regions of the world, and the other in the more developed regions of the world. One other current impact I've also seen in terms of globalization of food system is homogenized diets, or what I've cheekily called living by bread alone. So like I was saying earlier, 75% of the world's food supply is dominated by 12 plants and 5 animals. We have wheat, we have grains like maize, and we have sugarcane and corn and all that. Those are the crops that dominate our food supply chain. And it also means that there are a lot of research have been done that come to the conclusion that across the world, our diets are becoming less diverse, and then which opened us up to a lot of challenges in terms, especially as regards climate change. Again, which leads us to the third current paper, which is the climate conundrum, in which, on the one hand, agriculture and agri-food system contribute across the value chain contributes a lot to climate change challenge that we're witnessing. And on the other hand, climate change has a lot of impact and is expected to have a lot of impact on the agri-food systems, especially in the developing world. So having looked at the current trends, and I then decided to also go through some of what I call the emerging trends, or some of the weak signals that we're already sensing that some of them are already there. They are not very mainstreamed yet, but they are some of the trends that are expected to pick up going forward as regards the implication of globalization for food systems and food security across the world. One of them is what we've witnessed recently in terms of decoupling, which is really, I would consider a weak signal right now in terms of what we call the decoupling in the global system, or what we also call the globalization. Like I said, it's a weak signal. It's not even a big trend yet, but it's something we also need to look out for. Some other trends I've itemized there include the potential for crop and disease pandemics because of easier and faster movement, which is spurred by globalization. Also, another emerging trend is increasing nationalism and protectionism, and what the implication for food systems and food security. We also have the biosecurity and terrorism issues, the smart and IoT control systems, cybersecurity issues, and then we also have the newer and alternative forms of food. I'm going to expatiate a little bit on some of these at least 3 to 5 of these before my time runs out. So first, talking about decoupling. I've tried to frame this because these are some, like I said, some of these are weak signals, and we really don't know where the chips are going to really fall yet. But it's also about thinking about the future and prepare. Trends research is about understanding what is out there or what could be out there, and then also preparing for it before they happen. So in terms of decoupling, I think some of the questions that have been coming to mind is also, what does decoupling in the global system, what does it mean for food what implication does it have for food security and food systems across the world and across the different regions of the world? What would a decoupled digital or internet infrastructure mean, for instance, for the input, production, and distribution systems that our current globalized food system is based on or currently runs on? You understand? What would one other question was, would decoupling mean shorter value chains, increased food sovereignty, and more diverse diets, which is what some of the food activists or climate activists have advocated for? Or could it also lead to a significant drop in production and make it harder for people to get enough food where they are needed or where people really need to get this food, which would then defeat the purpose or the positive of all those diverse diet and potential gains of food sovereignty as advocated by many of the food sovereignty activists? And two, one other trend, increasing trend as regards globalization, which is a little bit been arrested due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we expect after we emerge from the lockdowns to probably accelerate again, is the faster and easier movement of crops and first-time easier movement of crops and materials, which could then be like a breeding ground for crop and animal disease, for a potential crop and animal disease pandemic. If there's any, one of the things the current pandemic has shown is that it is very easy for diseases to spread across the world due to the high interconnected spot by the globalization over the last few decades. Also, we're also looking at, when we look at the cross-border trade and global increasing monoculture in the agri-food system, it could lead to pandemics that could easily destabilize the global food system and then increase food security risk in the most vulnerable parts of the world. So some of the questions that come to mind as regards them for us to think about would then be, what are the likely pathways and consequences and intervention for this kind of risk? Understand? And what happens when there's a global rise of wheat or maize pandemic, for instance, or a global pandemic when it comes to some of the animal value chains, when you're looking at maybe chicken or beef or pork, for instance, and what are the implications for our economic system and our agri-food systems across the world? What does it mean? What does it imply for vulnerable countries that depend on others for food, for their food supply, and also for their input and for their supply of input and agrochemicals, so to speak? One other interesting trend I've picked up on, among others, is the issue. One of the interesting globalization trends is the tendency towards nationalism. And if there's one major lesson that we've learned from the recent COVID-19 pandemic, that when push comes to shove, countries really do prioritize their own need and their own national interest above the global interest, above their. So nationalism is usually chosen, is a lot of time preferred to global equity. So looking at that, how could that emerging trends towards nationalism and protectionism, how could it play out in the future of food security, especially in the context where we are probably dealing with a global crop or animal pandemic? Could that indicate a likely future in which food nationalism and hoarding is an expected response in that case of a global crop or animal disease pandemic? What would that word in which we're having to make that kind of decision, what would it look like? And what would that word look like? And what would a world in which countries On the other hand, what would the world in which countries are food self-sufficient also look like? So we're looking at this equity versus nationality, which are especially in the context of nationalism. And we already see that playing out with the vaccine issue in times where countries are prioritizing ordering vaccine for themselves as against having a global distribution. So how could that play out also in the agri-food system, and what would be the implication for food security globally if we find ourselves in that kind of context? One thing also I quickly have to run through is also the issue of smart farming and the potentials and the risk going forward. And as Internet of Things and 5G and even subsequent improved technologies become mainstreams, and as they become mainstream and then easier to access and easier and cheaper to access, we're looking at that increasing tendency towards smart and remote farming and distribution systems that will then become mainstream and more common across the world. While there are many opportunities, and a lot of the opportunities have been enunciated as regards optimizing food production and distribution systems around the world, and all other potentials, economic potentials around costing and then reducing labor and all that. I think some of the other side or potential risk going forward is then looking at what would that future look like? How do we manage the risk posed by competitors and rivals, for instance, at the private level, and the antagonistic state and non-state actors at public level to the security of that kind of system, of a farming system that is based on connectivity? You understand? How do we manage potential data breaches and cross-border data governance and ownership issues? And of course, what about privacy concerns? How do we manage that? How do we then put in place structures to manage all these issues? Talking about potential risk and all that, and managing potential risk, my last slide will then be talking about cyber conflicts, food security. Are we moving towards a world where we are looking at the potential food wars? And I'm going to paint a very hypothetical scenario in a world where we have where much of our farming is then based on smart farming and IoT controlled. Conflict has always been, for a long time, has always been one of the causes of hunger and food insecurity across the world. And cutting supply to food has always been one effective tool that belligerent nations have always used against their enemies. So in a situation where we then begin to have food was when, are we looking then at a potential future where state and non-state actors, belligerent state and non-state actors, are then using cyber attacks, for instance, or could hack their IoT control food systems and distribution value chains of their rivals or foes to paralyze their food system in the broken global order. Lastly, then, would there be laws at the global level, UN level, for instance, to anticipate and resolve, forestall this kind of risk? And can those laws be enforced? Or do we need a new global conflict resolution systems that can anticipate and manage these forms of attacks and risk, and then maximize the potential opportunities? So I'm going to stop at this level. Thank you. Thank you all for listening.
Bonmi, thank you so much for that. That was very interesting. We're already starting to get some questions via WhatsApp. So I know that we're going to have some good discussion at the end. So thank you again. Our next speaker today is Desigan Naidu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Water Research Commission. Desigan is a leader and scientist and an activist for positive social change. As CEO, he leads the Water Research Commission's South Africa's dedicated natural water and sanitation innovation research and development agency. He is also president of the global NGO Human Right to Water and a founding member of the Water Policy Group. He has previously served as in a senior position in the South African national government and South African universities, having begun his career as a medical scientist in a specialist children's hospital. He is a counselor of South African National Advisory Council on Innovation and a fellow of the Mapungubwe Institution for Strategic Reflection. Dezigan will be speaking on sustainable water management and its implications on water security and the challenges and opportunities related to holistic and sustainable water management. Dezigan, why don't you take it away? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And indeed, I can concur that first presentation was quite riveting. Let me just get my slides up. There we go. I hope you can see that.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Colleagues and all the folk out there in the YouTube world, I'm going to spend these 15 minutes trying to take you on a small journey. And I think you might find this journey interesting, and it actually plugs in well with some of the factors that Bunmi had put in his presentation about the current trends in the world. So I'm looking at Horizon 2071, 50 years from now. And thank you to the UAE for putting this opportunity on our landscape to examine this 50-year future and looking specifically at pathways to sustainable water management. A quick stop to remind us where we are currently and the global development problematique and its impacts on water as it impacts on everything else is primarily around these three factors. We do have a population dynamic factor related to inequalities in the world, inequities in the world, and an inability for us to be able to resource across the world in the manner that we should. But in addition to that, we have to admit that our economic growth pathways for the past 30 or so years, apart from being fossil fuel dependent, has also been extremely water intensive, and some will say extremely water wasteful. And this is a major part of the challenge in the water sector. And the third component is the climate crisis. The climate crisis is all encompassing. We have had brief reprieves with Kyoto, with the Paris Agreement, but by and large, this continues to dominate the thinking in the vulnerabilities around the world, as it shows up on the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Register every single year for the last 9 or so years, and more recently at the top of that list. So I think we are agreed that we are in a water scarce century and we have to deal with this. So what I'm proposing is that there are at least three pathways we can follow to 2071. The first of those pathways is dominated by the challenges associated with COVID-19. COVID-19 is organized to reorganize our lives in a negative way, unbelievably. We are sitting with an economic crisis. Some will say this is just a failure to completely recover from 2008. This is partially true, but I think COVID has introduced new dimensions to that economic crisis around the world. Our inability to work and operate and keep functioning workplaces means that we have great difficulty dealing with the health crisis itself and with everything else. The net result is what we're looking at is a very difficult pathway because we have fallen behind on almost all of the SDG targets, and very particularly in this discussion around SDG 6. And it looks very difficult for us to get back on track, even where we were on the lower pathway before. So one of the pathways to 2050, if we continue in this trend, if we do not make any drastic changes, and there have to be very drastic changes in the near future, if we don't manage to get past this epidemic, perhaps in 2021 or by the middle of 2022, then the pathway that is available to us to 2071 is the low road. And the low road really is a luta continua. The struggle really continues. In fact, the struggle may well be exacerbated on the back of a combination of greater inequality on the world on the one hand, and Antonio Guterres has been quite prolific in the way he has spoken about this as the real pandemic that we're dealing with. And Bunmi referred to this around food inequity in the world, but also with an inability to recover economically. This is a very difficult pathway that is available to us. But this has been recognized, and folk have been working hard on this. In fact, one of the speakers coming up just now, Professor Oche Unva, when he was still deputy as the deputy chair of UN Water, helped to formulate this initiative around the decade of action and the global acceleration framework. Both designed, launched last year, and designed to organize for a right tracking of the trajectory around SDG 6 so that we can get pretty close to that target by 2030. And it's easy to see that organizing for water security has important and pivotal implications for every one of the other SDG goals. But over and above that, it leads to a better growth pathway for the world, a better development pathway, and a more sustainable development pathway. And without this, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So we're looking at a scenario where if we continue to do the things as we were trying to do before the pandemic, and organize to implement our technologies with increased acceleration, we will be in an inch by inch scenario. In my view, not the perfect place to be, but certainly a lot better than the low road. But colleagues, what we really should be thinking about now is around how we plot the next S-curve. And I find this slide quite pivotal and riveting. It's akin to what has happened before in history, and we need to learn from it. There was a time when the dominant paradigm around travel was firstly on water and secondly powered by wind. And so what the ship manufacturers continuously did is they put better sail systems, better mast systems, better control systems on how to capture the wind to get faster and faster ships to get their cargo and people from one place on Earth to another. When the reality is, as we were going towards the end of that S-curve on the point of diminishing returns, as it is illustrated by this sailing ship called the Panama, we needed to switch to the thinking around what was going to happen next. And the next was, of course, steamship travel. So learning from that, we need to be building the next S-curve right now. And this is supported by a variety of pronouncements and events this year. January this year, I think, has been hugely interesting. It is organized for, firstly, a breath of fresh air because there have been some major changes in leadership in the world. But more than that, it introduced very early on a very important set of conversations. The first of those, chronologically, was at the Climate Adaptation Summit, which saw the presence of 22 heads of state, some 50 ministers and leaders from every facet and every stakeholder group around the world, engaging in what the vector needs to be for the next couple of years. And that's around the concentration on adaptation. And if you like, energy is to mitigation as water is to adaptation. Following on from that, the World Economic Forum started talking about the concept of the Great Reset, an acknowledgement that we have been on a very difficult pathway to date, that we need to radically change what we were doing in very fundamental ways to get to a point of sustainability going into the future, without which we are going to be lost. Not to be outdone, right now as we sit, the spring meetings are happening. The meetings of the World Bank, the meetings of the IMF. This is the global community getting together to plot the pathway and the strategies for this year. It's really important to note that the theme of this year's spring meetings is economic recovery, yes, but the target is very specific. It's toward a green, resilient, and inclusive future. These are the very folk that for the longest time were on the other side of the fence. These are the very folk before whom and before whose buildings we used to stand as younger people with placards, asking for a very different pathway for the earth, for development, for the people of this planet. And here they are starting to lead this conversation themselves. The last point I want to make around this before I talk a little bit more about that third pathway is this quote from Steve Jobs. And he says, and I agree with this, and I'm sure many of you will, is that we all have a great respect for incremental improvement. The concept of Kaizen is very powerful indeed. But the attraction, the need right now is for revolutionary changes, because only revolutionary changes are going to get us into a much better space than we are currently. So what is that third pathway? And what is the promise of the third pathway? Well, the third pathway gives us the opportunity to get to water-sensitive towns and cities, to organize for human settlements to happen in a completely different way from what has happened in the past, so that, one, cities become self-sufficient with regards to water, with regards to energy, with regards to food, by and large, and generally manages to take care of a lot of its waste within the boundaries of the towns and cities. One, it increases the securities inside that environment because there's higher water security, higher food security, higher energy security, higher health security. But more than that, it reduces the ecological footprint on the environment around the cities and towns. And this is a huge movement in a very positive direction. But what will it take to get there? Because the philosophy clearly is sound. I think we can imagine the cities and towns that we currently live in, or the prominent ones around us, and organize in our minds at least to have a view on how that could look in a green future. We can see how many problems that will solve in the immediate surroundings around us, but what are the pathways? And in the water world, the first of those pathways is on the issue of supply. That already, and we are now in 2021, we are in the first year of the third decade of the third millennium. And we are still organizing ourselves to be dominated by supply being associated with only one thing, and that is surface water. And this is true for 90% of the world. We need to diversify that rapidly because the technological environment that is available to us, the engineering that is available to us, says that we can do a lot more than that. We have the option of sustainable use of groundwater. We have the option of reuse and recycling. We have the option of desalination of both seawater as well as brackish water and other environments being brackish aquifers, but also special environments like in my country, we have these ponds, these underground ponds of now disused mining and the mining basins. Now, the mining basins in my country are about 4 kilometers deep and are filled with water. And there are these smart little microbes that are continuously mining and leaching out in those basins as we speak every single day and enriching that water, but creating high levels of pollution. Using desalination techniques, we don't only provide a source of new water, but we also have a smarter way to mine out the valuable salts and minerals in those systems. So smart economic models of how we engage the issue of reuse and recycling and desalination is absolutely key. And the last one is that we use far more than we actually need, and usually at the wrong level of quality. So water conservation and demand management becomes a very, very core part of that strategy. But we have to look at other revolutions as well. And one of those revolutions available to us, and something we have to credit some very important partnerships in the world, is around new sanitation. Looking at sanitation completely differently. Looking at sanitation on the one hand as being waterless or very low water, because water is such a scarce commodity. And the people we have to credit for that are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who introduced us to the concept of reinvent the toilet. And now we have several institutions and countries all over the world engaged in this project. So new sanitation organizes to firstly reduce water use, which is a boon in itself. But over and above that, it organizes to reduce the energy use. But it doesn't stop there, because you can now start to beneficiate the waste in a much smarter way than you were able to do before. And the net result around that is that there are extremely valuable byproducts that are possible to come out of this. And the work of folk like Karthik Chandran at Columbia has painted this picture for us in the most profound way. And we are now looking at value in waste. In fact, the World Bank yesterday has released a new report talking to precisely this issue. So what we're looking at on the back of new sanitation is beyond the water use and the energy use is actually energy production, chemicals extraction, protein and lipids extraction in addition to that. So colleagues, what we're looking at here is that if we want to get to a low carbon, prosperous water future in 2071, if we want to look at the high road rather than the other two alternatives, we need to be looking at source diversity. We need to be looking at new sanitation. We have to be looking very acutely at the water, energy, food nexus. And Bunmi has started talking about that. And we have great examples now around the world where when you organize yourself to plan and then implement on the water, energy, food nexus paradigm, the multiplicity of the results that you get is actually really profound. We may be looking at a future using this kind of nexus and perhaps including the environment and land around water security, energy security, and food security simultaneously, knocking off many of the SDGs together. But the last point I want to make is that we have to radically change the way we manage these systems. We had a very top-down approach for the longest time. We now need to move to inclusive governance. And this was, if you like, the fourth P that was introduced at the World Economic Forum by Klaus Schwab, when he talked about people, planet, and prosperity, and the principle of inclusive governance. So colleagues, that is what I'd like to share with you for now, that we have indeed been challenged by 2020 in the most profound way. But as we sit now already in the first quarter of 2021, we are looking at the possibility of building forward greener and healthier and more resilient. I thank you very much indeed.
Again, thank you so much. That was very interesting. Really appreciate that. And look forward to being able to ask some questions. So our next speaker is Olcay Unver. Olcay is a global leader in water policy, and he is currently a professor of practice with the Environmental Resource Management Program at Arizona State University. He is an industry fellow at Australian Rivers Institute and a member of Water Policy Group. He serves as the vice chair of UN Water from 2018 to 2020. His public service career spanning 3 decades he has led FAO's water program and activities, UN Waters World Water Assessment Program, the UNESCO's Program Office of Global Water Assessment. Prior to joining the United Nations, he was a distinguished professor of water resources at Kent State University, Ohio, and president of Southeastern Anatolia project in Turkey, where he transformed a large infrastructure project into a sustainable socioeconomic development plan. In 1999, he was listed among the 19 European visionaries by Time magazine and was featured in the New York Times for his efforts towards sustainable human-centered development. Olcay will present on the role of technological advancement in achieving global food and water security and focusing on opportunities and challenges. Olcay, take it away.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, and have a good day, everyone, wherever you might be. I will be using a PowerPoint presentation, but before that, I would like to give you the gist of my presentation. I will talk about both food security and water security, and focusing on the intersection of the two. And the groundwork was already set by the previous 2 speakers. I will talk about technology and innovation, and I will use innovation in the sense that it does not necessarily mean new technology, advanced technology, or anything new. Innovation is something, a process, a device, a tool that can be used in a new way to make a change and hopefully to perhaps disrupt a process that is not helping the world. So let me go to my presentation. Okay. I will start by the definition of food security, and then I will structure my presentation around the elements of food security. So the international definition of food security is that it exists when all people at all times have access, physical and economic, to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So we have everyone, all the time, access, availability, and safe and nutritious food. Please keep that in mind, because I will come back to that. And food security is based on availability, that is the physical availability and distribution, but access, the ability to use this food, and then utilization, the ability of our bodies to actually make good use of this food, and stability, meaning that these three elements are available, are present at all times. Water security, on the other hand, sits on a slightly different set of pillars. Water security is defined, and this is the UN water definition, to which I also personally contributed. The capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining various uses, including livelihoods, human well-being, socioeconomic development, and protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and with a final element of preservation of ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. So we are again talking about the supply side, the accessibility aspects, and then sustaining livelihoods and various uses, ranging from the use of humans all the way to the ecosystems of our planet. And as such, we are talking about transboundary cooperation, good governance, political stability, and proper financing for water security. So going back to the four pillars of food security: availability, access, utilization, and stability, what are the technological advances, needs, and possibilities that can help improve our food and water security, preferably in a mutually supporting manner? And not all of these are related to both food and water security, but through the nexus relationships that Desigan eloquently talked about, they are linked. So in terms of the availability of food, we have a number of areas for technology and innovation to step in and make a change. And these include increasing agricultural productivity with specific focus on land and water productivities. And some of the examples are drought-resistant crops, disease-resistant crops, and transgenic crops. Another area for food availability is improving crop yields in addition to the productivities. And these are not necessarily huge technological advancements, but making some of the existing technology more available, more widely available, such as low-cost toolkits for extension workers in agriculture, marker-assisted breeding, and this kind of technological support. Then anything that increases soil health and organic carbon in the soil will increase food availability and also help with climate change, adaptation, mitigation, and natural resources. Then a directly water-related aspect that is enhancing the availability of water, and Desigan talked about this, and it's various, ranging from rainwater harvesting techniques to detecting groundwater levels and quality, low-cost water storage for farmer families, particularly smallholder families in the developing world, and a circular use of wastewater. Then another water management element, which is specifically about irrigation and fertigation technologies, which are well established, but still have plenty of room to develop and to more widely implement it. Then the animal husbandry provides a lot of opportunities, and being a huge water user, this particular sector, we are looking forward to these particular innovations and technological advancements to be more widely implemented, ranging from increasing animal production, the efficiency of production, and increasing nutrition, better feeding practices, better disease management. Again, we have low-cost toolkits and pharmaceuticals here made more readily available. And then any practice to reduce GHG emission intensity and environmental impacts. Aquaculture is a huge potential, and we will be seeing it implemented both in high-tech and low-tech settings all over the world. And something that we have seen with COVID, the risk to our food value chains, urban and peri-urban farming, including indoor and vertical farming, aquaponics, different types of greenhouses are among the accessibility innovations that can be much wider. Then the accessibility of farmers to markets, to transportation, to credit schemes is another existing and potential area of technological innovation, followed by post-harvest technologies, the low-cost and high-tech solutions, and then the proper storage of the products, refrigeration, transport, with specific emphasis on the preservation of fruits, milk chilling, seed and grain drying, and low-cost refrigeration and hermetic sealing. And this will also help both climate change and water resources through the reduction of loss and waste in food. Then comes the utilization of food, which is about the nutritional value made available to our bodies. And that will help with the two ends of the spectrum. As the first speaker indicated, we have a problem of malnutrition, underweight, and hunger increasing on the one hand, and we have obesity increasing at the same time, and in the same places in all regions of the world, irrespective of the economic development level, and utilization of food of course, in a positive manner for our bodies will contribute much to dealing with food security and with implications on water security and climate change. mitigation. And here, new forms of biofortification is listed as an existing and potential area. Last but not the least is food stability. That is about making all of these three elements available all the time. And this is probably the most difficult aspect. And it relates also directly to the human right for food. So here, climate smart agriculture is one particular element that I would like to underline with increases in resilience to climate change and the technology to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Before I conclude, I would like to step into the water management territory and talk about three highly rewarding areas for innovation in water management, and I will have some overlap with Desegun here. The first area is technology related, and obviously making more supply available is a very active area of innovation and technological development, but also water management through digital solutions using the environmental big data, the great simulation capacity with cloud computing, low-cost networks, sensor systems, and Internet of Things open a huge horizon, both for large commercial farmers, but also small farming communities when implemented properly and with adequate support from the development partners and communities. And here the need is for easy to operate tools, practical use of economic and social elements, interoperability, and evidence-based decision support incorporated in technology. I will use the same example as Desegun about circular use of wastewater, and this is a picture depicting the 218 Stockholm Water Prize on wastewater treatment. And one of the recipients of the prize was Professor Redman from my university. The second rewarding area is innovative water management. It's knowledge-related water management. And this is not directly water management per se, but linking local water management with global supply chains and trade, because what we trade basically imposes a lot of restrictions or flexibilities on water management. And as a result, more water is controlled by procurement departments of corporations rather than production departments. And this is important for the business community to understand and incorporate into their operations. And here, one example is about the use of water in livestock production systems and supply chains. This is a new methodology, just came out a year ago in terms of making the best use of water through water footprinting in livestock systems. And my closing slide is the same idea, same emphasis as Desegun's presentation, that is about governance. We are governing a sector in the 21st century with the 19th century traditions and structures and institutions. And this is an area that is full open to innovation in order to help coordination in a horizontal manner through different sectors and all levels of government to allow and optimize stakeholder participation to make sure that transparency, accountability, and equity is maintained, and scientific knowledge and technological progress is properly integrated into the both decision and implementation aspects of both food and water resources sectors. And with this, thank you very much for your interest, and I will look forward to the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So, so we have one more presenter before we get to the Q&A, and I'm excited to introduce Robert Braers, who is the founder of Our Future Water, located in New Zealand. Robert is the editor-in-chief of Palgrave Handbook and Climate Resilient Societies in the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Urban and Regional Futures. He is the author of a variety of books, including the Green Economy, and the Water, Energy, Food Nexus, and developing the circular water economy, among others. Robert is the founder of Our Future Water, which has a knowledge partnership with the World Bank's Connect for Climate program, and to take on climate change, as well as with the UNEP, World Bank, OECD hosted Green Growth Knowledge Platform. Robert will be presenting today on food and water security during crisis, discussing the best practices in dealing with the ongoing COVID pandemic and the efforts made in planning and finding solutions to food, water, and security challenges during crises. Robert, thank you for joining us.
Good evening and good morning, wherever you are. It's I'll just get this going. Okay, so today I'm talking about the food and water security, essentially the nexus during crises, particularly the COVID-19 crises. So we are very well versed in rising demand for water, rising demand for food, and we can see that globally agriculture already accounts for 70% of all water withdrawn. And by 2050, the demand for food will increase by 60% due to numerous factors, rising economic growth, prosperity, etc. However, at the same time, this agriculture production requires a lot of water, and water will be increasing significantly for more food production. And climate change will only exacerbate this problem that we have, essentially. There's the rising number of people that are now living in water scarce regions will only increase as the decades proceed. And most people experience some form of water scarcity, whether for 1 month or portions of a year already. So essentially we are facing this food water nexus crisis in itself, and amongst the COVID-19 crisis, amongst the climate crisis, economic development and lack of SDGs, etc. So the impacts of food water nexus, is quite severe, because agriculture, as I've just said, is one of the largest water users, but it also is one of the largest water polluters of surface and groundwater supplies globally. Now, at the same time, that demand for water is increasing, regional conflicts or even transboundary conflicts within nations, for example, between Georgia and Florida, between states and Australia, between, regions and countries. So we can see that the water food crisis or the food water crisis is increasing potential for conflict, which could lead to, eventually armed conflict. That's not out of the realm of, impossibilities. And climate change, with more frequent, more severe, more of everything, is creating this really condensed, highly pressurized situation where we have this rapid population growth that requires more food, which requires more water. And this is creating a really, almost a little time bomb, essentially, that could go off at any moment if we continue the business as usual path, which is basically, I need more food, I need more water, and we take, but there's no give to the environment, there's no give to other sectors of the economy that require that water, and also between neighbours in between countries, across regions, etc. So COVID-19 has also changed the way that people access their food. Home-based production is a very obvious thing that's happened now with hydroponics, rooftop gardenings. It's empowering people to take food security into their own hands. At the same time, with people, losing their jobs and, made redundant, it is also providing, job training opportunities for local communities to develop new skills and also create a wider awareness of the challenges that we face in the building back better and more greener. So basically, in a nutshell, for my presentation, I'll be looking at, how can we reduce the water and food, nexus challenges to actually achieve food and water security. And the two main parts of my presentation will be promoting more crop per drop, as well as protecting water quality. Basically, growing more with less water, hopefully, while protecting the water quality of, not just for human uses, but nature as well. We often forget that nature is one of the largest water users. And if we take away that water or we contaminate the water, then the ecosystem services that we rely on for our survival are impacted. And economically, if we then deteriorate our water quality, our water treatment costs for drinking water supplies in cities and regions increase as well. So there's a huge economic, impacts of not taking this very seriously. So my very brief presentation will be focusing on global best practices to achieve food and water security. It's a very short tour around the world of what's been done during COVID-19 times and what locations have been doing to reduce food and water nexus pressures, increasing food security, increasing training opportunities for young people, etc. So my first little, around the world is to San Francisco. So San Francisco offers a community garden irrigation meta grant program. Essentially, it enables or promotes, urban agriculture production to be very water efficient. And the grant is waives the fees for the water utilities, installation costs for installing the dedicated irrigation system. And this is aimed at projects with a, very long lifespan of 10 years. And, this kind of program is just one part of many programs that the city is offering to encourage urban agriculture, with the overall view of, seeing the urban agriculture not only provides food security, but it provides health outcomes, it provides education, and also economic benefits to residents. Then we fly off to Minnesota. And, this is these states are well known for agriculture production, etc. But with the rapid urbanization that we're focusing on, our century is really becoming the urbanized century. Minnesota has decided to launch what's known as the Urban Agriculture Grant Initiative. One interesting feature about this grant is that it focuses on youth agriculture education and urban agriculture community development. So it's not just large scale, commercial production systems it's focusing on, but it's encouraging youth and children to be participating in the food productions and also contributing to their own livelihoods in some shape or form. It provides great training opportunities because, if you're getting community credits or credits for local polytechs, etc., and also provides opportunities for jobs in the future. So one of the benefits of this agriculture grant is that all organizations can apply for it. So you have non-profits, you have for-profits, tribal communities, local government entities. And most importantly is that instead of just writing out a big check for someone to plant a garden, the application is based on environmental impacts. So the project actually has to tell the department how are they reducing the environmental impact of urban agriculture. In this case, promoting clean water and using water efficiently. And off to Singapore, we are obviously very aware that it's an island nation state, one of the smallest, city-states in the world. And just only last week, they announced a $60 million agri-food cluster fund to promote the transformation of the agri-food sector. And they've recognized that they're wanting to create a 30 by 30, which means that 30% of food will be produced locally by 2030. And this agriculture, cluster fund is to create this new sector to become highly productive, but most importantly, climate resilient and resource efficient. One of the smallest land spaces in the world, you wonder how did they find, the space to grow anything? But what they're looking at is promoting large scale, commercial scale, automated and advanced farming technology solutions, basically vertical farming and any type of, rooftop gardening, etc. And one of the most critical things about this application is that, again, the funding is only available if it's going towards technology that increases water efficiency, but also reduces pollution and waste. And I always like to look at these examples in different parts of the world, different climates, obviously tropicals. Now we go to Scotland, and we don't really think of Scotland as being water scarce. One of the interesting things is there are there are parts of Scotland very dry, and there's parts of Scotland very wet, and usually where it's dry is where most people live, and they're taking water away from different parts of the area. So it is quite a, there is a water scarcity challenges in Scotland. Now, throughout COVID-19, the Scottish Government organised a Sustainable Agricultural Capital Grant Scheme, and basically provided funding to farmers to purchase specific agricultural technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as improve water quality. There's a very similar scheme to what the Netherlands has, is where they list the technologies that you can use funding for, and these are pre-approved technologies. So that kind of takes away the reinventing the world problem of one farmer deciding to, okay, I'm going to implement this technology and having to develop it, and another farmer then has to do another type of technology. This is just basically going to a supermarket, you're pulling off this technology that you need. It's been pre-approved, and it has environmental performances that are well known. And in this case, it's a matching fund grant, which basically means that there's less risk for the government because it puts some of the burden on the farmers to match the fundings. So you're not just writing a blank check and hoping for the best. You actually have accountability in this type of program. And it's a small grant, £20,000. But the fact is that of the whole agricultural list that they have, it covers everything from water quality to capturing rainwater, stormwater. And down into South Australia. So basically, one of the issues that a lot of places have in this world is growing crops that are inappropriate for the local climate. And normally we just grow something and we transport the water over large distances and probably take it away from nature or take it from some other user without pretty much asking them whether they need that water or not. It happens very often in transboundary environments, and South Australia is no exception, of the Murray-Darling Basin, providing most of the water. So what they've done is they've updated their 2021 South Australian crop sowing guide, which basically says this is what you should be planting, and this is based on improved soil water decisions and also reduces the phosphorus application on fields. So basically growing the most appropriate crop for the environment that in a time of year as well. It sounds very simple, but very few places, generally even do this. In my location, we have very dry agricultural land, and we decided that dairy is the best thing for this environment. So we transport the water over vast distances to grow green grass for dairy cows to eat, whereas it's not the best for the location environment. So from these very small mini cases, locations, the best practices that I've come out with for other locations to follow is that locations need to promote water metering in urban agricultural practices, basically more crop per drop. We need to educate the youth to become more sustainable, so they become the future leaders of urban agriculture and also just agriculture in general. And we also need to provide funding to scale up automated and advanced farming technology. That's the only way we can increase efficiency of water and efficiency of food supply. We also need to encourage our farmers to implement new water efficient technologies. And also we need to assist farmers to plant the most appropriate crops to protect soils and water quality. And that is a very simple around the world in 10 or so minutes. But I'd like to thank everyone today, and a wonderful opportunity to present this in the UAE. So thank you to everyone and all the other speakers that were performing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was very informative and very interesting to see what's happening around the world, to see some of the different ideas. So that was wonderful. So now we have an opportunity to jump into some questions, and we already have some questions that have been sent to us. So I will start with those. We'll start with one that has come in for Bonmi. We have a question on, has globalization made or marred the prospects of sustainable development? Bonmi, that one was directed to you, if you'd like to answer it.
Okay, I think that's an interesting question. As globalization made or marred the prospects of sustainable development? I would say that question cannot be answered in the affirmative right now. It will depend on a lot of the things we do going forward, and a lot of how we respond to many of the challenges we're facing today, and the kind of choices we make, the kind of governance structures we put in place, and the processes we adopt going forward will determine if globalization is going to make or mar the process of sustainable development.
Very, very interesting. So to be continued. It'll be a while before. It's one of those things that we may never know. You know, it's a moving target to know where we are. So very interesting.
Exactly.
Okay, we have a question for you. Is the human race making better or worse use of its resources today compared to 100 years ago? If so, how?
We have been using our resources less sustainably, okay, compared to 100 years ago. Not necessarily because they were, more aware 100 years ago, but I think we have become too greedy and refuse to see the early signals of our resource base deteriorating as a result of our development activities. And when we started acting, then it took a while, and it's still taking a while, particularly after the pandemic. But that would be my take. Okay,
very interesting. Okay, we have a question for Robert. Robert, has technology helped improve the food and water security situation in the developing world so far? So do you believe that technology has improved the situation?
On one hand, yes, because industrialization of farming has obviously increased dietary and meeting dietary requirements, but at the same time massive consequences to the environment. So and also lack of groundwater mining. So that's not the best thing that's actually happened in developing world and also developed world as well. I don't think that our technology or water efficiency has got anywhere near it needs to be. We have huge amounts of work to do, and hopefully countries just leapfrog old practices that we've led the way in. Don't follow us, follow something better, basically, is what I would say.
Definitely, they need to find that steam engine that Desigan was talking about instead of continuing on as we are. Desigan, I have a question for you. What are the biggest challenges let me start over again. What are the biggest challenges to a conserved water future in 2071? Is there a realistic chance of achieving this objective?
Thanks for that. Firstly, there is, of course, a realistic chance of achieving. But it does require an investment in many of the mechanisms that have been presented by all four of us, actually. And one of the things that both Robert and Oche emphasized is that some of these improvements that we need in the system are not entirely new. They need to be upscaled quite dramatically. In fact, they're there, they've been proven, there's a proof of concept. In many cases, they've been demonstrated. It's now about upscaling. But I think the core issue is that we have to tackle our own lifestyles.
Yes.
And this is a really big factor, because we have gotten used to living in a particular way. In fact, George Bush Sr. is quite famous for his utterances at one of the COPs that the American lifestyle was non-negotiable. Well, you know, as long as those lifestyles are non-negotiable, we're all going to be in the doldrums. So that is the major shift. The second big issue is that we do have to radically change the patterns of production and consumption in the world. This divide between North and South, as we currently have it, is a key point of the lack of sustainability. And the third point, to repeat Robert, is don't follow the pathway that has been there before. What the developing world really has to do now is to leapfrog significantly. And one of the things I advertise a lot is that Africa can be the laboratory of how things should be done in the future, not just for Africa, but for the whole world. Thank you.
Great. And I think, how do you take that one step further? How and getting people to change that lifestyle? I think in the last year, we've all realized that we can change our lifestyle, that it is not, it's not impossible. It's not, this hasn't been the exact way we wanted to do it, but we have changed our lifestyle. So how do we continue to make progress with changes instead of just reverting back to the old normal?
Well, maybe three things. The first is what you've said already, is that if 2020 taught us anything, yes, we have proved to ourselves that we can live very differently from the way that we did in 2019, and quite successfully. The second issue is around reimagining what our roles are in the global space. You know, one of the really important things that comes out in the Das-Gupta report, the review of the biodiversity economy, is our own role as investors in propping up the current fossil fuel economy. And this is really important, because it's about saying that, yes, some very important people need to make some decisions, but actually we are also important people, and the decisions we make every day may be even more important than the ones the other folk are making. And the third issue is the thing that Oche was emphasizing, is that we have a platform of technology that really has to be taken advantage of. We talk about the fourth industrial revolution as if it is in the future. It is here, it is available, and it needs to be used.
Very good. So we have some questions that are not directed to anyone in particular. So I'll ask the first one of those. Can profitability and environmental sustainability coexist? So Bonmi, would you like to be the first to jump in on the idea of profitability and environmental sustainability coexisting?
Yes, and I'll refer back to what Desigen and Uche. I think a lot of things depend on how we define things. How do we define profitability? It has to do with us reframing the concept of profitability in our minds and aligning it with environmental sustainability instead of retrofitting, which is what we've been doing for a long time. For a long time, we've been trying to retrofit our need to be environmentally sustainable into the current economic paradigm, as again, situating profitability within the overall economic paradigm, or situating it within the context of the environmental health of our planet and all that. So I think they are not mutually exclusive. It's about the way they define profitability and the way what profitability means to us. These are the kind of things we need to reframe in our minds, and then to reconceptualize and then mainstream. And like as been said, a lot of ideas around that are already out there. They just have to be mainstreamed and taken up at a more global level, a mainstream level. Thank you.
Great, great. Would anybody else like to add to that idea of profitability and environmental sustainability coexisting? Oche, go ahead. You don't even have to raise your hand.
Well, one aspect, as Desigan identified, is a behavior change. So, that is for sure, and that is not happening at the extent that we would like it to happen. The other one, as Bhumi said, is incorporating environmental services and environmental aspects in what we call profit. Okay, if all of our resource base comes for free, and if pollution comes unpenalized, then profits can go sky high. So up until recently, actually, for investment purposes, the valuation of ecosystem services was a big issue. And development banks and definitely commercial banks were not able to fund nature-based solutions as a part of a project, because for many projects you can have hard solutions with infrastructure that can be coupled with soft solutions, with nature-based solutions. Now, as of last year, the valuation of ecosystem services has been standardized. The United Nations has introduced the standards and how to calculate ecosystem services and put them in feasibility reports and what you call profit or what you call expenditure. So in order to incorporate these into business decisions, this was a missing link. Now it does exist. And we have indications that development banks such as the World Bank will start using these.
That would be wonderful. It would make a world of difference. Robert, do you have any thoughts on profitability and environmental sustainability coexisting?
We've got all these abundant terms of the green economy, circular economy. Let's just try to merge them all together. Create a green economy that reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, restore. If we follow that pattern, then we should be fine. But if we continue our business as usual economic model, the linear economy, then we're heading for disaster again. So, and of course, we have all these different definitions. We have different viewpoints. Let's just try to come together for at least one term and move forwards. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, absolutely. And Desigan, what do you think? What is your insight on this idea of coexisting?
It can coexist. It is about making the big change. And it is about a long-term view as opposed to a short-term view. Yeah. But there are some movements that are showing us that this is going to happen to some degree. For example, the Scandinavian pension funds making a decision to no longer invest in anything related to the fossil fuel economy is a very, very big shift. That's a couple of $1 trillion a year in investment. And I think those are going to start shifting the nature of profit on the one hand. The other issue is when people have to start paying seriously and serious dollars for environmental services, then the equations change quite radically. Of course, there will be profit available for environmental goods. The advantage of environmental goods is that profit is beyond a bank account. It goes into a sustainable livelihood for people and the sustainability long into the future. Absolutely. And decisions like Scandinavia, those kinds of decisions do make an impact and other people watch that. And so hopefully we will see a lot of people following those kinds of ideas. That's great. We have another question here about how does poverty affect the environment and overall sustainability, and how does Bonmi and Desigan both talked about starvation and obesity, but how else does poverty fit into affect that? We'll start again with you, Desigan, if you would like to touch on how poverty affects environment and the overall sustainability. Well, thank you for that. It takes one back 9 years to the WSSD, the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And in the run-up to that WSSD, which was hosted in my country, there was a huge debate for the better part of a year before that around how to work out the right kind of focuses to be discussed at the summit itself. And there are a bunch of folk from both the developed and the developing world that wanted to keep the environmental agenda way away from the development agenda. And one of the things I think WSSD managed to do is to combine them. Because our reality is, one, poverty is a key driver around local people's not taking care of their environment, even though their families and their clans had done so for many, 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 many generations before that. And we should not have people in that desperation. But two, environmental services and environment-related services for many places in the world is the key mechanism to actually escape that poverty trap. And this should be supported in the strongest possible way. So on the one side, yes, you have elements of the problem. On the other side of that same coin, you have exactly the elements of the solution coming from a sustainability paradigm.
Wow. Yeah. So we just have a couple more minutes. Does anybody else want to touch on poverty and how it affects environment and the overall sustainability?
I'd just like to add to what Desikan already said, that poverty is also an issue of access. And when you look at some of the challenges that poor people tend to have, is that limited access to resources in terms of material resources, in terms of time resources also, because they spend much of their time working to be able to put food on the table or put food over their heads, then limiting what the bandwidth they have to then take on or to be able to, because they can't all the pennies, it's then difficult to be able to make decisions in a way that favor environmental sustainability as against survivability. So a lot of times poverty reduces people to making short-term decisions as again long-term, more long-term environmentally sustainable decisions. So these are the main challenge that the main dimension that poverty injects into the environmental sustainability conundrum, so to speak, in my view.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So to wrap up, I'd like to kind of go around the circle again and just have each of you summarize in 1 minute kind of your overall thoughts on the topic. So Olcay, could we start with you? Can I put you on the spot and start with you? Could you do a quick wrap up of your thoughts and based on the additional conversation and stuff like that, kind of where your thoughts are?
Yes, water and food security together is definitely possible to achieve and definitely necessary for the provision of the very basic human rights, such as the human right to water and sanitation and human right to food. Technology and innovation are essential elements, but they will not solve the issue single-handedly. They have to be a part of a broader package of solutions, which include not only the tools or the means with which these tools will be used, but also how the systems that govern these tools are designed and changed in order to make sure that the necessary change is not prevented to happen by the inflexible governance structures. So technology innovation, yes, but governance, a governance reform, a revolution is essential to make those happen.
Fantastic. I really like that idea. So I'm going to ask the others to kind of talk also about where are the solutions, where should we be going? What's the positive actionable items that we can come out of this? So Des, again, what are your thoughts on the overall conversation that we've had tonight, and where do you think we should be going? What are the to head towards solutions?
Well, to start off with, I think we must just remind ourselves that you can't solve the problems of the 21st century with 20th century technologies and solutions and 19th century operating rules, because they dominate the world over in every sector that matters, whether it's water or agriculture or energy or health. The second is that we have to open ourselves up that in this very advanced information age, communication is not happening as well as it should. Because the translation of those vast repositories of knowledge that sit inside the system into actionable tools that can be used to transform the way that we live is not happening rapidly enough. And so there's work to be done in that domain, but we have a head start with what we already know and have accomplished. And the third is we have to empower people. We have to bring more and more people into these teams, water teams, food teams, agriculture teams, energy teams. This is the only way we're going to go into the future, by the empower people with knowledge, and then people themselves will organize for that transformation to happen. And I think the positive is that it looks good currently. We have been through the worst last year. We've seen very starkly all over the world uniformly how bad it can get. But it's not only a virus that can precipitate that. Bad responses to climate change will have exactly the same result. And thank you very much to our organizers for putting this together. And if I am allowed to, best wishes to our organizers and hosts for the month of Ramadan.
Thank you so much. Great. And Robert, what are your positive takeaways and actionable items that you think that we should be moving towards to reach some of the ideas that have been shared here?
I think stop seeing water and food separately. We need to bring it together, and we need to create policies that bring the two together and focus on new technologies. And using our creativity and creating policies that bring together communities, youth, different sectors of economy, and really ramping up agriculture that actually takes care of the environment as well as meets food demand, as well as accounts for water scarcity. So we need to stop thinking of silos and start working together in different government departments, different government agencies, across countries, across sectors. And really start focusing on not just technology, but also behavior change and how to create new skills, new green jobs, new green technologies, and skill sets for young people, for unemployed people who lost their jobs in COVID, and move forwards. Because we've got hundreds of years of policy expertise up our sleeves, and we can transport this policy and create a different package it for somewhere else in the world, and really help each other out. I believe that policies can be implemented across different countries, just changing it slightly for their different circumstances. But if we start sharing those ideas, then we have a good future.
Great, thank you so much. And Bonmi, what are your thoughts on actionable items and positive ways that we can move forward from what we've learned and discussed today?
I think a lot have been said, and which that I agree with, and so I'm not just going to repeat what has been said. I'm just going to have one more addition to it.
Okay.
Like I said, we have the technology. A lot of processes are already ongoing to help us to get to a place of more sustainability and all that. I think, in addition, what I'm just going to add to that is that while we have all the technologies, a lot of these challenges we're dealing with are not going to be solved by technologies alone. It will take a lot of reframing of mindset and rethinking of our worldviews and concept of development, and then also reframing what it means also, like we said earlier, around profitability, and situating again, finding our economic system within rethinking our economic paradigm and locating it within the bigger environmental space as against trying to retrofit it, the environmental sustainability into our economy, so to speak. So at the end of the day, it will be about how we see ourselves going forward, or thriving as a species, as against trying to not overusing and what. Lastly, I'm also being said it's about intergenerational fairness, ensuring that we do not, as we use resources today, we also create governance and systems that ensure that coming generations have enough to use also, that we do not do things at the detriment of the coming generations. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a great conversation. It's been very inspirational, and I've really appreciated all of your thoughts and ideas. And I'd like to thank Trends for hosting this great opportunity for us all to get together and to have this conversations. I would like to just let everybody know that the next event that Trends will be having will be the Israeli political scene in light of the 2021 election. This event will take place on March 12th. I'm sorry, March, goodness gracious, on Monday, April 12th at 2 p.m. UAE time. So we're looking forward to that next conversation. And thank you all again for this inspirational conversation. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.